You are listening to Middle East Monitor Conversations, bringing you lively discussions with prominent voices from the region and beyond, as we delve deeper into issues shaping the Middle East and North Africa, from politics, the culture, and the arts.
Hello, welcome to MEMO Conversations. I'm video producer Osman Butt. On the 15th of May 2022, Palestine Action Group based in the UK staged a protest outside the Bristol headquarters of the Israeli Arms Company. As part of the protest, Palestine Action Group aimed to disrupt Elbit Systems operations and went through the windows to gain access to the site and barricade themselves in. While the UK branch of Elbit Systems says they do not supply the Israeli military, Elbit Systems works very closely with the Israeli military, and the company says its unmanned drones are the backbone of the IDF. 7 activists involved with that protest that day were arrested and put on trial. All 7 were convicted, but in March 2024 were all given suspended sentences and allowed to walk free. Of the 7, 2 of the protesters were Israeli dissidents, and now we are joined by one of them, Stavit Sinai. Dr. Stavit Sinai is a philosophy lecturer, Israeli anarchist, and anti-apartheid activist based in Berlin. She was formerly imprisoned for taking direct action against Elbit Systems in the UK. Stavit Sinai, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to MEMO Conversations.
Pleasure to be here, Usman.
Yes, indeed, and it was 2 years ago now that this action took place, and you tell us. And before we sort of go into, what happened that day and what happened with the trial, which I think is important for our audience to sort of know about, could you perhaps just give us an overview of what is Elbit Systems?
Well, Elbit System is Israel's #1 arms manufacturer. It produces more than 80% of the killer drones to the Israeli military. It also exports its commodities worldwide. So it basically uses Gaza as its experiment field, where it has the ability to test its weapons on the captive population of Gaza. This is what gives it the edge in the arms industry, namely the kind of empirical experience that not many other arms companies have. Elbit Systems is a roughly $10 billion industry, and it is based in my hometown, in Haifa, in apartheid Israel. And it, as you've mentioned, it works in tandem with the Israeli Defense Forces, where basically if the apartheid forces meet some kind of operational obstacle, Elbit System is going to be there to provide, and I quote, the boutique solution for their needs.
Indeed, it's also important to emphasize here as well. This company is not just based in Israel. Obviously, it's from Israel, but it's got branches everywhere in the UK and in other countries as well. But when you talk about the boutique solution, what do you think they mean by that?
For example, during the Great March of Return, Elbit System has provided some the kind of drones that were later on were able to surveil and drop bombs at civilians, at protesters, without risking the soldiers. So the entire enterprise aims at protecting the Israeli soldiers from injuries and possible death. So basically, whenever the Israeli Defense Forces have some kind of, as I mentioned, some kind of operational need, they would just work with Elbit System, which its workers are also based within military bases. So there is not much of a clear separation between the kind of military industry and the so-called civilian industry. So they are very much intertwined, as I said, working in tandem. For example, now we just had, just to give an example, we just had 10 activists currently imprisoned for the Filton action that took place as well in Bristol, where the Filton 10 managed to find a killer drone that is currently being used in Gaza. And the whole enterprise, as I said, aimed at protecting like military lives, if you can say that, basically shielding Israeli soldiers from combat. So it actually really goes against, like, maybe just mention like my background as really embedded within Greek philosophy and history, where in Greek culture it was shameful to return from battle without one's shield. So one was, you can say, very much obligated to die in combat on one's shields, on one's sword. And it was extremely shameful to return from battle. So this ethos is completely contradictive of the Israeli ethos, which is to protect oneself from combat and to basically wreak havoc among civilian lives.
And it's important to emphasize here as well that in the current wars that are being waged in Gaza and Lebanon, these drones and many other drones are in heavy use. We see drones being used all over the place for surveillance, for attack, for various things. It's very much part and parcel of what's going on. And it's also interesting when you mention the fact that this company specifically sees Gaza as a kind of playground, because there is this long history of Israel referring to the occupied Palestinian territories as their lab. And their big selling point for Israeli weapons around the world is that they're battle tested.
Yeah, exactly. This is how they market their weapons, as battle tested, namely tested on Palestinian people of Gaza. So they basically experiment with their weapons on the captive, as I said, the captive population of Gaza, to be able to enhance their profits in the industry.
Indeed. Now, if you would take us to the day, I mean, you did this protest on the 15th of May, 2022, which is Nakba Day for Palestinians, where they commemorate the dispossession and ethnic cleansing and expulsion from historic Palestine in 1948. And so this was, I think, to mark that day. But could you perhaps tell us, before we sort of go through what happened on the day, what was the initial idea or plan for what you were trying to do that day?
So basically, we had the reason to believe that on the top floor of the Bristol headquarter site, there were drones that are being produced. Based on information we researched into and gathered, Bristol headquarter is the center where all the different parts of the drones are being assembled and being put together, where the program is being implemented in the software. So we had the reason to believe that it's located on the upper floor, and the kind of overall aim was to gain access to the factory while smashing everything we see on our way, and basically dismantle the means of production and the weaponaries and the means of destruction that we might find there. So that was the goal. Of course, also that was the kind of very specific goal, but the overarching goal was to shut the factory down and prevent it from operating on a wider scale. And also, this is the place where, as I said, the kind of assembled commodities, the assembled products or weapons are being shipped to apartheid Israel. So the goal was to prevent the weapons from being shipped to used in the course of genocide.
I think the action also successfully raised awareness that this was actually happening in the UK and in places like Bristol, that this company was here and that it was doing this. Because I think when you're sort of in many different parts of the UK or any other country in the world, you might drive past a building which belongs to a certain company and not know what it does, really. And so I think it maybe this highlights that as well.
Yeah, I mean, like the arms industry is hidden behind civilian facade. It is located within civilian areas. And this is how it also kind of gained legitimacy by hiding itself to be just a regular workplace.
Yes, it's the arms companies are using civilian shields.
Exactly. Although they claim we all know the opposite claim.
Yes. So talk to us then, what actually happened on the day itself?
So on the day itself, we basically were dropped by a few cars, and we immediately, as we reached the site, we immediately started storming the site to gain access to the interiors. So we broke the doors. We had sledgehammers and different crowbars and other tools to gain access. It was very quick. One of our comrades, very brave comrade, has managed to find entrance through the main door, and we all kind of went through. We met security, like so-called security personnel that also attacked some of our members, attacked Ronnie Barkan, leaving him with a broken rib, causing other injuries to our other comrades, including hitting one of our comrades on the head, dragging us away. So we met with kind of very severe violence, although we pledged to not engage in any violence towards whoever we might meet. Immediately, we were able to regain access to another part of the factory. It was a conference room, and we barricaded ourselves trying to find, using bolt cutters and like ladders, trying to gain access to different parts of the factory with the intention of, as I said, basically dismantle everything, breaking the computers, just causing destruction with the intention to shut the factory down, and which was indeed very successful in that sense.
How long was the site disrupted for?
I don't have specific information, but we assume that for a couple of weeks the factory was shut down just in order to the possibility of repairing all the damage, all the broken glass, removing the paint. Of course, there were like tons of paint that is being spilled, red paint to resemble the blood of Palestinian people that is being spilled. So it should have taken weeks and to restore the factory to its initial malicious function.
And when you were sort of detained, how were you sort of treated by the authorities?
Well, first I was detained. We were detained at the Bristol police station. They basically woke me up in the middle of the night after having very little sleep and asking me to sign all kinds of documents that I refused to do, obviously. Then they had us all on a huge transportation van, which is a very sadistic, very kind of Mephistophelian, I think that's the word, Mephistophelian tool to transport prisoners. I've never seen anything of that kind, and I've been arrested in Palestine as well. I have much experience with being transported by a police van, unfortunately, and I've never seen anything of that kind. Then we were brought to the cellars of the magistrates' court, where we were held for about a whole day, taken to the judge, and then were sent. We were remanded to prison, taken again on the same van. Some of us to the women's prison and some of us to the male prison. So we were separated in prison itself, although it was a profound experience of kind of rediscovering my inner inner properties, inner spiritual properties, and inner strength, and learned a lot about my capacity for empathy and kindness and love to others. I was nonetheless deprived of my medication. I have 2 autoimmune genetic diseases that I must be treated with medication for, and I was not given those medications, which caused me tremendous distress and pain. I was also isolated for a very long duration of time, more than 3 weeks, which is also tantamount to torture under the Geneva Convention. Nonetheless, all of that was kind of pale in comparison to what we managed to achieve on that day, which is to shut down the war machine and to sabotage the war machine. And also pale in comparison, knowing what my Palestinian friends and comrades undergo in the apartheid prisons.
So before we sort of move on to the trial itself, could you perhaps tell us, you've mentioned, this was a very trying experience being in prison, though you got through it. Has this sort of left any psychological markers on you? How has it impacted your life since then?
Well, while I was in prison, I wrote a memoir, which was later on published at Freedom Press, which is an anarchist publishers established, founded by Kropotkin. And it's available online. So that experience, as I said, was the most profound experience of my life. And indeed, I suffered physically, but I knew that my sufferings are framed within a wider sense of meaning. And what greater meaning is there than to be able to put an end to a crime, than to shut down the war machine? So I felt the only fear I had in prison, that I won't be worthy of my suffering, that it would be in vain. And indeed it wasn't, because when I was released, I was able to kind of reassess the great achievements that we attained. And it was actually an experience of pure bliss and happiness, knowing that I was there after having been successful in shutting down the war machine.
Indeed. And so we now sort of want to talk a bit about the trial itself, because obviously, this event happened 2 years ago. You were, we know also you were convicted, but given a suspended sentence in March. But during the trial, you presented a lot of evidence about what Elbit Systems does, and so on. But this wasn't, from what I can tell, taken into consideration when it came to the actual verdict itself. So could you perhaps talk to us about what happened during the trial?
Well, first, one of our jury members was one of the prison guards guarding us in the women's prison. So just to tell you kind of about the quality, to tell you about the character and nature of the body of jury we were presented with. Of course, we were able to dismiss the jury, that specific juror, but in fact, the whole body of jury should have been dismissed, because, who knows who else was on that jury. We were not able to present to that jury all what we wanted to, all what the law enables us to use as a possible defense. We weren't able to argue for protection of lives. We weren't able to argue for necessity, why we had to do it. And we weren't able to argue for urgency, why it was urgent for us to act. So the jury could not have heard the entire story, and that was taken away from us by a wider process that began with the Colston case, and in a wider attempt also seen in the Kill the Bill, what is known as Kill the Bill kind of protest, which acted against the crime sentencing and order bill that basically removed civil rights from protesters and enables the Crown Prosecution Service to incriminate and charge people and basically drag them to prison without, again, being able to present the jury the whole story. So we weren't able to argue all of that, why we were able to act as we did, but we did have one form of defense left, which is consent. Namely, had the owners of the building known what is actually happening in there, namely that that company produces weapons that are being used to commit crimes against humanity, then they would surely have agreed to that kind of action. And so it's a kind of very convoluted form of defense. And indeed, we argue that, and that just by having that, we were able to say that we acted in order to prevent war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I was given testimony, I gave testimony, and each of us did. So we stood on the stand and were able to give our version of things, and also went through cross-examination by the Crown Prosecution Service. And of course, the CPS got nothing from us. All of their line of prosecution just fell one after another. They didn't get anything from us apart of the re-emphasis of why it was so important to act in the way we did. Nonetheless, we were found guilty by that body of jury, also based on the testimony of Mr. Alan Wright, who is like the director of UAV engines, and that's a whole kind of different episode that took place in the trial, where he basically was trying to claim, and that was the overall claim of the prosecution, that we were just simply misled to think that Elbit UK is completely disconnected from Elbit System, although it has the same administration, the same knowledge that is being shared, the same machines, the same program, the same software, the same ownership, and the same personnel. So Ellen Wright nonetheless gave a testimony testifying that although he admitted that all profits are being channelized in Elbit Israel, he kind of argued that Elbit UK does not have anything to do with it. It does not have it is not basically trying to sell a version that Elbit UK is an independent kind of subsidiary, and that they don't send weapons to the Israeli forces, to the IDF, but rather send it then to Elbit System Israel. But he was just basically trying to avoid linking those two bodies, although they are essentially one.
Indeed. So thinking now about the sort of trial itself and the outcome, what's your sort of overall feeling about it all?
Yeah, I also gotta mention that, like, Ellen Wright testified behind a closed curtain, which was really kind of amusing, because Ellen Wright has been in the British military for 2 decades. He knows exactly what's going on in his factory, although he claims he doesn't. He claims he doesn't know what Elbit System is producing. Again, as the director of UAV engines, the engine is the most important part of the drone, right? So he was claiming that he doesn't know anything of the kind of commodities that are being produced there. And the fact that he testified behind a closed curtain kind of attests to how weak, kind of attesting to a great weakness on Elbit side. So they are actually afraid of a couple of vegan activists who are sitting in a dock, unable to do anything in that position. And nonetheless, he was too afraid to show his face in fear of us recognizing him, although his photo is all over the internet. And it's not that easy to pinpoint to who that person is. But it kind of showed the kind of, we as activists, we come with our voices, with our bodies, which we have actually used in order to prevent a war crime. We come with our voices to the stand, and we testify, and we smile, and we are proud of what we did, unlike Ellen Wright, who sat behind a closed curtain, afraid of being recognized.
So did this sort of experience, particularly the trial, and in light of everything you said, did that sort of further sort of confirm to you not so much the righteousness of the cause, but the rightness of the action itself?
I mean, I have absolutely no doubts about the kind of righteousness that we carry in relation to the overall action, and also in relation to the method we have taken. I mean, Ronnie and I and other comrades have been advocating for BDS for many years. We have put petitions together. We went on demonstrations. We did everything we could. We disrupted political events. We challenged Israeli politicians, often with a great cost to our personal affair, livelihood, and statuses. And none of that worked. None of that worked. So it was only a matter of, it was only the kind of reasonable kind of form of resistance that we could have taken by turning into direct action instead of pleading, instead of appealing to the authorities who are complicit in the crime and begging them to stop the crime. We actually went and stopped the crime ourselves, dared them to stop us. So it's very important to kind of change the power relations between those who are perpetuating and committing the crime and are complicit in the crime against those who dare to stop them. It is not for us to waste energy appealing to the oppressor, but it's up for the oppressor to try and stop us from doing what is righteous. And how can righteousness prevail without anybody willing to give themselves up for a righteous cause?
Indeed, and this sort of kind of brings us to the next part of the discussion, which is about your sort of development as an activist, because from what I'm hearing here, you've got a very strong, sense of what is right and wrong, and what Israel is doing is wrong. And I'm sort of wondering how we sort of developed that, like going back. When did you sort of become aware of the sort of issues that Palestinians are facing, and how did it sort of convert into this kind of activism?
Well, I think that we are all born with a kind of natural ability to use our rational capacity and discern right from wrong. Having people imprisoned in a concentration camp, 2 million people unable to leave Gaza, having their sources of livelihood being controlled, including the calculation of their caloric intake. You don't have to be especially unique to understand that this is wrong. So we are all born with that kind of mechanism. It is just the kind of social structures and oppressive structures to which we are subjected that are able to indoctrinate us into getting removed and detached from our own very natural inner consciousness. So basically the way I came to the realization that Israel is committing crimes, it didn't happen over, like, it was not one specific event, although there were a few milestones that contributed to that realization. But I grew up in Haifa, in a segregated city. I grew up in a Zionist family. a family of Holocaust survivors. My father was born in 1945. Both of my parents were serving in the military. My father, a photographer and a graphic designer and an artist, also was providing services to Elbit System itself and to other industries in the north of occupied Palestine. And so I grew up in a highly indoctrinated society, and I was a part of it, and I was the product of my society. And it wasn't until I was recruited to the military, and I served for about 2 weeks before I was basically escaped it. Basically, I said that I'm going to end my own life if they're gonna keep me there. So it was just until I was recruited and was able to understand that something is inherently wrong in being in a military camp, having the gates behind you being shut and you are unable to leave, and also being sleep deprived. Back then, it was just like not for me. I was interested in poetry and philosophy and literature, and having to run around in the desert with weapons and kind of heavy equipment was just not for me. So although I did not know how to get excused or get released from military service prior to being recruited, once I was there, I had to kind of resort to the means I discovered, which was just basically claiming that my health is intact and I'm going to kill myself unless they're going to release me. So just by the very fact that I did not undergo the entire plan of indoctrination, and you have to understand that people in the military are being abused and they are being tortured. Being sleep deprived is a form of torture. So just by not being fully indoctrinated, fully brainwashed, also on the kind of physical, somatic level, I was able to kind of develop new ways of thinking, or just having the possibility of thinking outside of the kind of hegemonic, normative, kind of Zionist mode of thinking. And I was also, because you see like people who are serving like, let's say 3 years or 4 years in the Israeli military, they cannot look back and say, oh, I was a real idiot spending all this time in the military. I could have just, I could have, I don't know, do a degree instead of that, or go traveling, or or fall in love, No, it's not the case. People cannot deal with the cognitive dissonance revolving their military service. But I was spared of that. And instead of going to the military, I went to the university, where Tel Aviv University, or Sheikh Munis University, as it's supposed to be called, after the village that is still beneath the university. So I was privileged enough to gain higher education and meet very radical professors who taught me about colonization and taught me about apartheid and taught me about decolonization. It's the first time when I've seen the movie The Battle on Algiers. And I kind of realized, okay, like we've seen that film and we all realized, okay, we are the French in this story. Before that, before getting university education, I did not know where Palestine is. I did not realize that there is no Israel and Palestine. There is Israel on top of Palestine. I did not understand those as the same entities. So, and also in light, or because of an event that happened around that time, around 2004, about 20 years ago, right? There was a Palestinian girl who got murdered by Israeli officers in the West Bank, I believe, and that's something that happens on a daily basis. But this specific incident or case was so outrageous because the soldiers went to commit a procedure that is called execution after death. So they basically went and stabbed her and shot her again and again to kind of make sure, to assure that she is dead. And that caused tremendous outrage around campus. And this is the point where I started thinking, and later on participated in the demonstrations in the West Bank organized by the Popular Villages Committee. And it was the first time, 2006, when I stood against the Israeli military myself.
It's actually
and then it just went on from there. And from that point, I was against them and not with them.
It's really important to highlight a few things there, because I think by choosing to leave the military, that's not an easy decision to make in a society like Israel, which it's often remarked that most states have an army. In Israel, the army has a state, because of course everyone sort of has to do it by law, and wherever you go in Israeli society, the military follows you. So if you go to a job interview, even if you're just being a waiter, question you're asked, one of them, where did you serve? And so it's a very big thing in that country not to actually serve. It's, you're not pulling your weight if you're not doing it, is the idea. But it can be even more extreme depending on, your family and your circumstance. Certainly not an easy one. And also for a lot of people, it's how they sort of learn about their attitudes towards life, isn't it? I mean, a lot of Israeli attitudes towards Palestinians and others are formed in those military years and the build up to it. So it's a very big thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. But like for me back then, I was like 18. It was 2003, and I just couldn't bear it. I was not highly politicized or radicalized in that moment. I just couldn't bear it. I couldn't wake up in the morning in 5 a.m. and running around in the desert, or having to clean up the room all day long, or sleep with my weapons. It was just not feasible. It was just not realistic. For me, I was discovering, I mean, again, it's like one's formative years, and I discovered that indeed I was more of a hedonist than I was a patriot, to put it. And today I'm very much interested in hedonistic philosophy, but that form of hedonism and being spoiled and understanding that that's not a way to live, and that my freedom was more important to me. And once one is entering a military basis as a soldier, they're being deprived of their agency. They can't just leave and go to the beach. It's impossible. You have to get permission. And that was just inconceivable in my mind, because still I had, even when I was 18, I had the awareness that I'm free and that my freedom is uncompromisable, and I'm not gonna give it away. And that my freedom, my ability to just go and live and do what I want is the most important, and it's above all. And it not in the very kind of egoistic way, but just a matter of having a free will and wanting to execute my free will and having no authority above me. So this kind of actually this is why I became an anarchist. I don't believe in a hierarchical structure of authorities, and I subject myself to no authority above that of reason.
And it's also and it's also sorry. You want to
No, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to add as well, when you were also talking about the issues you were having with it. I mean, we're seeing a lot in the Israeli press, a lot of reports now about soldiers having complete mental breakdowns. And there was a report I saw the other day about one particular platoon where there's normally 30 soldiers serving in it. And they were going on their 11th tour of Gaza back in September, and only 6 turned up. Everyone else is off for either medical or psychological reasons. So there's a lot going on within the society right now in that regard.
I believe that the biggest, statistically, the biggest body of casualties and death happens is caused by soldiers killing themselves. This is why they were so easy, like very cooperative with me being released, because there are more soldiers that are being killed by suicide than by actual combat. So actually, not being in the military did exerted some form of price for me, but it was never my intention to kind of really being absorbed, being assimilated into high tech or into kind of economical. It was not my dream to become a bank manager or it was never the case. So I turned into education and I turned into writing, into research. So it was never an obstacle there. But of course, there were many prices to pay, also losing many of my friends, a lot of social problems, but still not like dodging the military was the best decision of my life. The best. And I would never regret it. And I actually recommend everybody just to dodge, just leave. Like nobody have to go through that. And I'm also very happy if the authorities, would pick that up, that I actually gave them an excuse just in order to dodge the military. Let them prosecute me by all means.
Indeed, indeed. And now I sort of want to turn to dissent within Israel and its
Yeah.
situation right now, because of course there's always been dissidence within Israel itself, but at certain time it's obviously not easy to be a dissident, again, depending on your specific circumstances. I mean, you can get horribly abused.
Yeah.
If you're well known in the streets, you can just, if you're out on a stroll one day, you can get abused that way. There's all sorts of things. What is the sort of, based on what you're seeing now, what is the sort of space for dissenting voices?
There is no place for dissenting voices in like this specific moment of time. Israeli society is highly mobilized into their genocidal aspirations. It's very kind of monophonic, you say, like it's very kind of coercive, like how to say
Monolithic?
sorry, it's like speaking in one voice, and that voice seeks revenge, and there is no room for other voices, or like, although it claims, I mean, like one of the biggest lies of Israeli democracy and of being pluralistic and having a variety of opinions. Well, we know it's nothing but rubbish, frankly. The same as it is in Western democracy, Western liberal democracies. And we know it since the 1920s. It's nothing but rubbish. It's nothing but a facade to pacify the population and to keep it subjected to the powers that be. So today, in today's Israel, as it was even like 10 years ago, there is no room for dissent, absolutely none. Although very few do find ways to engage in meaningful resistance by joining the popular resistance in the West Bank and by escorting Palestinians and helping them, for example, harvesting their trees and their lands and so on. So there are forms of resistance, but it's very on the very margins of society. Now, there are some organizations which I personally find despicable, such as Standing Together. It's really like beyond despicable, because they pretend to engage in some kind of objection to the to the current regime, to the current government, while they still engage in liberal Zionist politics. So there are many leftist organizations which would claim to be anti-occupation and so on. They would never say the word apartheid, but they would say, yeah, we stand against occupation or we stand with Palestinian, but they still, nonetheless, reproduce and maintain a concept of Israel as a Jewish state, namely as a supremacist, racist state. And this is something it's one of the biggest problems in today's discourse, that there are those liberal Zionists who are trying to render some kind of form of legitimacy to an enterprise that has exactly zero legitimacy.
Yes, and I feel like that also ties into some of your academic work on the construction of knowledge. Unfortunately, though, we don't have time to go into that. We should have you back on to discuss that or anything new you work on. So I want to sort of give you the chance to say, what is the sort of last thing you want to leave us with, to just, in terms of final thoughts about all of this and everything we've discussed? What's your sort of, what would you like to leave us with?
Today, both the Zionist regime and its protectors in the West, namely the US and Germany and Europe, are trying to not only they support the genocide, but they force their population to be complicit within the genocide. In Germany specifically, where I live, there is severe brutality and violence against protesters. So it's very similar to the slave masters in the US, where it was not enough just to be just not have any opinion around slavery, but one had to actively support slavery in order to not be harassed, intimidated, and being a victim of violence in the South, in the US South. So it's very similar to today. One is forcibly being forced into being complicit with the crime of genocide by rendering resources, paying taxes, and by being forced into silence. Now, maybe the last point I want to make is that it's actually, and it's better to actually go to a physical prison than to be kept in the mental prison that the state inflicts upon us.
Dr. Stavit Sinai, thank you for talking to us at MEMO Conversations.
Thank you, Usman.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. If you missed this one and would like to catch up with it or see previous MEMO Conversations, you can go to our website. But please do tune in next time for more MEMO Conversations.
This was Middle East Monitor Conversations, brought to you by the Middle East Monitor in London.